Tell me a bit about the Roman Empire. Tell me something about the Roman Empire. Istanbul was the former capital of the Roman Empire, which is something not a lot of people know. Anything else? They were ruled by Julius Caesar and several other emperors. That's correct. I want you guys to name me some powerful countries in Europe. Who can do that for me? Powerful countries in Europe. Go ahead. United Kingdom, that's one. Huh? Russia, that's another one. France. Germany. Belgium. This guy behind you has an answer as well. Spain. Why are you laughing? He's right. Is it because he's a Real Madrid fan or something? So imagine there was a time when some of these countries that you mentioned, so the UK, France, Spain, Italy, Greece, all of these countries were included in the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire ruled from Rome all the way into the UK and all of these European countries. And then they went all the way east into Turkey, into Jordan, into Syria, into Lebanon, into Palestine, into Egypt, into Libya, into North Africa. All of these territories were part of the Roman Empire. And at the height of the Roman Empire, when the Roman Empire was at its best position, there was an emperor called Emperor Constantine. And he came after Julius Caesar. So the brother mentioned that some emperors ruled, some of them were Julius Caesar, some of them were Mark Antony, all of these people. But Caesar was the title of the ruler of Rome. So when Julius Caesar passed away, after him there became an emperor called Constantine. And Constantine saw how big the empire was, and he said the best way to rule the empire was to divide it into two parts, the western part and the eastern part. And he wanted to move the capital city from Rome, which was in Italy, into a place that would be central to both parts of the empire. And so he chose the place where Europe and Asia combined, and that was Turkey. And he built a city, and he named the city after himself, and he called the city Constantinople. And all of these places were part of the Roman Empire. After a while, all of the places in the Western Roman Empire, they didn't have that much money then. Now we see them as powerful countries, but at that time, they weren't that powerful. And all of the tribes that they were ruling over wanted to be independent. So they started to fight the Romans, and eventually the Western Roman Empire crumbled and it collapsed. But the Eastern Roman Empire continued, and the capital was in Istanbul. And the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he was alive, he even had interactions with them, to the point that he sent some of his Sahaba, such as Usama bin Zaid and his father Zaid, to go into battle with them towards the end of his life. When he passed away, some of the territories of the Roman Empire started to come into the Islamic empire that was spreading under Umar bin al-Khattab. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, before he died, he made dua, and he said, whoever is the army of Muslims that can capture the capital of the Roman Empire, which was Constantinople, he prayed that they would be a victorious army and they would be the people of Jannah. And so he predicted, and imagine this was an impossible time. This is like, if you look at the Arabian Peninsula then, they didn't have money, they didn't have resources, they didn't have wealth, compared to the Roman Empire, which was the biggest empire in the world at the time. That's like saying, us Tinasco students here are going to have an army that will go to America and take over America. If you hear that, you're going to laugh and think it's impossible. But the Prophet ﷺ promised the Muslims that a day was going to come where that would happen. And so they tried. In the time of Amir Muawiyah, they sent armies to invade Constantinople, and the armies didn't succeed. But some of the Sahaba, such as Abu Ayyub al-Ansari, who was the person who hosted the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ when he first arrived in Medina Munawwara, died in Istanbul and was buried in Istanbul. And many years came to pass until in 1453. So this is nearly 700 years after the Prophet ﷺ. There was one man who was the ruler of the Ottoman Empire, who was the one who decided to march on Constantinople, and Allah gave him the victory over Constantinople. But what's interesting about that young man, Muhammad al-Fatih, is that he was, when he took over the biggest capital of the biggest empire in the world, and the capital of the biggest empire that ever existed in human history, which was the Roman Empire, he was only 21 years old. I know we don't have any 21-year-olds in the room, possibly, but some of you that are 17, some of you that are 18, some of you that are 19. Oh, we have some 21-year-olds. Put your hand up. People are pointing and accusing. But my point is, all of the people who tried before the young man, they failed. And the victory was given to this young man. And he was only given victory because he believed in himself and he thought that he could do it despite his age. Even when we look in the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we see that the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has three major periods. What are the three major periods of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's life? Go ahead. The time he received revelation, the time he migrated, okay, we'll take the two. It's good. It's good. He did well. So the time he received revelation up until the time he migrated is called the Meccan period. And that was the time when the Prophet ﷺ lived in Mecca for 13 years. Then after that, there was the time he migrated and he established his own city called Medina. And he lived there for 10 years until he passed away. And up until the Medinan period, I would say the final stage, which is the most important stage, is the Fathul Mecca, the opening of Mecca, the victory of Mecca, when he reclaimed Mecca and brought it under the control of Islam. Each of these three stages of the Prophet ﷺ's life, there were young people around him who played an important role in helping him establish Islam. And the first person I'll talk about is a young man called Arqam ibn Abi Arqam, and he was 17 years old. So who's 17 at least in this room, if we don't have 21-year-olds? If you're 17, put your hand up. We got one or two 17-year-olds. How many of you are 16? Okay, so you guys are close. So I'm talking to you guys as well. Arqam ibn Abi Arqam, when he came to the Prophet ﷺ and he wanted to become Muslim, this was in the early days of Islam, he was only 17 years old. And he had a house that he had inherited from his father, and his father had passed away at the time. So when the Prophet ﷺ started to preach Islam and teach Islam, Arqam ibn Abi Arqam came to the Prophet and he said, I don't have much to help you in your mission, but I have a house and I want to give you that house so you can start to preach Islam and teach us the Quran and teach us about our religion. And so he accepted the house, and that became the meeting place for the Muslims. And if you think about that house, there's hadith from Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu anha saying she remembers her father Abu Bakr and her mother learning the Quran in that house. If you hear the story of Sayyidina Umar bin al-Khattab becoming Muslim, he became Muslim in that house. And many of the Sahaba that we know about, the 10 Sahaba promised paradise, such as Talha, Zubair, and Abdurrahman ibn Auf, when they came to Islam in that house. And so it was a young man that was only 17, that he didn't have much to give, but the little that he had, he used it for the service of Islam and the service of the community. And Allah rewarded him that all of the good deeds of all of the Sahaba that converted to Islam at that period, he takes a portion of their deeds, and he's always going to be remembered in history as the person who first established the first markaz, or the center of Islamic learning for the Muslims in the history of the Ummah. So if it wasn't for him, we wouldn't have here in Ghana today this school or this masjid, and we wouldn't be practicing Islam. If it wasn't for him, we wouldn't have had all of this history of Islam that we've had up until this point in time. And he was a young man who knew that even though he was young, he had something to contribute. The same time again, the Prophet ﷺ continued to spread Islam in Medina in Mecca for many years, until he reached the stage where he needed to move and make hijrah. As the brother mentioned, he migrated from Mecca to Medina. But there's something interesting that happened before he migrated to Medina. He had a young Sahaba whose name was Musab bin Umair. And Musab bin Umair was, again, 17 years old. And Musab bin Umair was one of the most respected young people in Mecca. Any clothes that came out that were the latest clothes, Musab had them. Any shoes that were the latest shoes, Musab had them. His parents had money, and so he used to dress well. He used to make sure his appearance was good. All of the young men in Mecca wanted to be like him, and all of the young women in Mecca wanted to be with him. And he had that reputation amongst the young people. And he, at that time, decided to become a Muslim and follow the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he put the fame aside, he put the popularity aside, he put the clothes and the shoes down for a second, and he started to learn Islam and study Islam and learn the Quran, to the point that the Prophet ﷺ trusted him, even though he was only 17 years old. And so there was a delegation of people that came from a city called Yathrib, and they heard the Prophet ﷺ preaching, and so they came and they pledged allegiance to the Prophet ﷺ. They gave bay'ah. And they said to the Prophet ﷺ, we are Muslims, and the place where we live in Yathrib, there's been two tribes there called Aus and Khazraj who are always at war with each other, to the point that all of our fathers and our grandfathers have killed each other because of this war. So the city is just full of young people like us, but we want a new direction. We don't want to continue to be fighting the wars that our parents and our grandparents were fighting. And so they saw Islam as a solution to their problems. And so when they gave bay'ah to the Prophet ﷺ, he said, I'm going to teach you Islam through one of my students, and I'm going to send someone to teach you Islam. But learn Islam first, establish yourselves, and then I'll come and meet you. So the original delegation was about 12 or 13 people, and he took one of his Sahaba, and it could have been any of the Sahaba. He could have sent Abu Bakr, or he could have sent Umar, or he could have sent Uthman. But he decided to take this Musab bin Umair and send him to the people of Yathrib. And when he traveled as a 17-year-old man, very young, he got to the city and he started to give dawah. And he started to call people to Islam, and he started to spread knowledge. And the following year, they came back with 72 people to give bay'ah to the Prophet ﷺ. And when the Prophet ﷺ saw the people and he saw their passion for Islam and he saw the youth and the vibrance of the community, that's when he decided that he was going to make hijrah, that he was going to move now to go and live in Yathrib. And it's when he moved and established himself in Yathrib that the name of Yathrib disappeared and it became known as Medina. So the fact that the Prophet ﷺ even had his own city where he established Islam, and from Medina we know Islam spread across the rest of the world, it was a 17-year-old boy that was the reason that helped him establish that community in Medina. So in Mecca, it was a 17-year-old boy, and then in Medina again, it was another 17-year-old boy. And then, after the victory of Mecca, when the Prophet ﷺ had control over the entire Ummah and the entire Arabian Peninsula, and he started to write letters to the different rulers of the world, he sent a letter to the ruler of Rome at the time. And the ruler of Rome and some of his soldiers had killed some of the Sahaba, so then the Prophet ﷺ now engaged in war with them. So the first battle, he sent an army, and the army was Abdullah bin Rawaha, Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, his cousin, and Zaid, who was his adopted son. And unfortunately, they were defeated and they were killed in an area called Muta in Jordan, and they were buried there. So after that, and the Prophet ﷺ heard that, the last ever army that the Prophet ﷺ gathered and he sent out against the strongest empire in the world at that time, which was the Roman Empire. And he took a general to place as the leader of that army. He could have chosen Abu Bakr. He could have chosen Umar. He could have chosen Uthman. He could have chosen Ali. He could have chosen Khalid ibn Walid or Amr ibn As. But he skipped all of them and he went to another 17-year-old man. He went to Usama ibn Zaid. And not only was he a 17-year-old man, but he was an African because his mother came from Africa. His mother was Baraka Eman, who was from Ethiopia. So it was a young black man that he chose to lead this army. And many of the Sahaba were confused and they didn't agree with the decision of the Prophet ﷺ, that they said, he's too young. How can this man lead such of an army? And this was the most important battle, or one of the most important battles in the history of Islam. But the Prophet ﷺ trusted him and sent him into that battle. On their way to the battle, that's when they heard the news that the Prophet ﷺ passed away, so they returned. But when they returned, after the Prophet ﷺ was buried, Sayyidina Abu Bakr sent them out again, and he said, I will never go against the decision that Rasulullah ﷺ had already made. And so this young man, 17 years old, was sent, and he was given victory against the armies of the Roman Empire. And this victory continued and continued and continued up until 1453, when the capital of the Roman Empire finally came to the hands of the Muslims under the 21-year-old Muhammad al-Fatih. And when he took this capital city of the Roman Empire, this was the center of Western culture, Western civilization, and Western education. He didn't destroy the empire. He didn't get rid of the empire in the way that European scholars like to tell us that the empire ended at that time. Because Muhammad, when he took over Constantinople, he took a new title, and the title was Kaisari Rum, Caesar of Rome. So he said he was continuing the Roman Empire. And that's when he decided to let Istanbul be the capital of the Ottoman Empire. Why this is an important detail in history is because Western education would have you believe that the beginning and the peak of Western education ended when the Western Roman Empire ended. They don't give the Eastern Roman Empire its consideration, and then they don't continue into the Ottoman period and all of the amazing things that happened there. But in real history, when you study it, you realize that the Roman Empire, which was the greatest empire that the world had ever seen, began as a pagan empire. Then it became a Christian empire, and then it ended up being a Muslim empire that extended throughout Europe and Asia and the Middle East all the way until Mecca and Medina. And all of this was because there was a young man who studied history, who understood who he was, understood what he was capable of, and then he believed in himself. And he became the Caesar of Rome. He became the emperor of the greatest empire that ever existed. And this was a young man similar to you guys. So why I say all of this is to say, when you study history, you see the stories of these figures. And though at the time they thought what they're doing was insignificant or they didn't give it respect, something as small as going to give the Prophet ﷺ a place so he could teach. Something as small as going to another city so that you can help people in their journey to Islam, a group of 12 people, or something as big as leading an army that's going to go and fight the greatest empire in the world. All of the people that did these things were young people that were the same age as you. But you know, now the day of wars and empires is over. And now we're in the days of knowledge and information and technology. And everybody sitting in this room has been given an opportunity that people outside of this school have not been given. You have access to science. You have access to knowledge. You have access to languages. You can learn English here. You can learn Arabic here. You can learn Turkish here, as well as preserving and understanding your native languages. And you have the doors wide open for you to go anywhere you want to in the world and do anything you want to do in the world if you make the most of the opportunity that you've been given here. So don't think of it as something light. Don't think of it as you being here in the school, that you have your uniform and you're going to class and it's boring and the teacher talks too much and you don't want to do your homework and all of these things. Because the small time that you're going to be here, maybe 2 years, 3 years, or 4 years, can be the time that can change your life, and not only your life, but the life of your community and the life of your society, and then eventually the life of your country. Any one of you today, just like Muhammad Fatih became the emperor of the Roman Empire, any one of you today could be the president of Ghana if you wanted to. Any one of you today could be a millionaire, a businessman, if you wanted to. Any one of you can be a scientist. Any one of you can be anything that you can imagine, because you have the opportunities and you have the resources that a lot of people outside of this place don't have. So I would always say, and my end note before I open up to you guys to ask me questions is, as a young person, don't think that you're insignificant, and don't think that you're not worth anything, and don't think that you can never achieve anything. Because all of the amazing things that have happened in history have happened because of young people. And even today, the things that are happening in the world now are happening because of young people. If you look at Instagram or Facebook or Twitter, all of these applications that people use, the history of Facebook, there's a movie about it. It was a young person who was going to university, that he dropped out of university. Don't drop out of school. But he dropped out of university and he created an application. He believed in himself. Now, there's no president in the world. There's no government in the world. There's no organization in the world that doesn't have a profile on Facebook. And I think they're the ones that bought Instagram and bought all of these different things. Even me, myself, as a young person, I'm a young person, but I'm sitting here in front of you today, speaking to you, giving you advice. It was just because maybe 10 years ago, when I was in the stage where I was going through my education, I had a dream, I had a vision, and I believed in myself, and I made the most of the opportunities that were around me. So you guys have an amazing opportunity here. The teachers and the staff are here to help you. They're not here to harm you. The education system is here to see you succeed. And I'm looking at all of these universities that people are going to, University of Ghana, University of Turkey, University of Maryland. All of these things are opportunities that are in front of you. And as you're young, I wish I was your age, that I could have the opportunity to go back and do more with my youth. So don't waste this time. It's the precious time that you have. And the Prophet ﷺ said, you have to use 5 before 5. You have to use your youth before you become old. You have to use your free time before you become busy. You have to use your health before you become sick. You have to use your wealth before you become poor. And you have to use your life before you pass away. So don't sleep. Well, you can sleep at night, obviously, but when I say don't sleep, it's a thing. Don't sleep and make the most of the opportunities, and don't think that you're too young or you're too small or you're too insignificant to be anything, because every single person that's in here has the opportunity to do something. I came from the Gambia before I came here, and I was given the opportunity to sit with the president of the Gambia. And in the discussion, we were talking, and he told me an interesting story. He said, I remember there was a year, 1978, when the Gambia was celebrating independence. And he comes from a village. He doesn't even come from the capital city. He said, but I traveled from my village to the capital city to watch the president give a speech on the celebration of the independence. And they handed out these free T-shirts, and I wore my T-shirt. And when I went back to my village, I didn't take that T-shirt off for a week because I wanted people to know that I went to the capital city. You know, village people. He said, I was there watching the president speak, and I was a village person. I didn't have any opportunities in the capital city. I didn't come from a wealthy family. I didn't come from a political background that would have given me influence or given me power or anything. He said, but 40 years later, I was the president, and the president was sitting in the crowd watching me give a speech because I believed in myself. So any one of you guys today, I want in 20 years for you to invite me back as the president or the vice president or a minister or a businessman or anything, and remember the speech that I gave to you here today, that you have the opportunity to do anything and be anything. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
Hafiz TV, unique every day.